First of all, apologies for my voice. I've got a bit of a frog in my throat today. I'm not sure why. I've tried clearing my throat, I've tried drinking water, I just can't seem to get rid of it, so I'm gonna try and power through this video regardless. Secondly, as you can see here, I have, courtesy of my school library, Batman Knightfall Volume 2 and Batman Knightfall Volume 3. Batman Knightfall Volume 1, I checked out last year, and I already reviewed that on this channel, and I'll link to my review of that in the description down below. Batman Knightfall Volume 3 I haven't read yet, so we're going to save that for another day, and today I'm going to be reviewing Batman Knightfall Volume 2. But first of all, just to recap what this whole trilogy is for anyone who wasn't reading comic books in the 90s. The trilogy of Batman Knightfall, volumes 1, 2, and 3, covered a storyline in which the normal Batman, Bruce Wayne, had his back broken by Bane. Bane was a new supervillain who was just introduced. Bane had a plan in which he released all the inmates from Arkham Asylum, so all of Batman's enemies were all suddenly running around Gotham at once. Batman had to go and fight them one by one as he progressively got more and more wearied, until at last culminating in issue 10 of Batman Knightfall. He confronted Bane. He had already been broken from the experience and could no longer resist Bane. And Bane was this huge, muscular superhero who was much bigger than Batman anyways. And Bane broke Batman's back, crippling him permanently, or at least so it seemed. So a replacement Batman was found, Jean Paul, also known as Azrael, who was a new member of the Batman family, but who took on the mantle of Batman and redesigned the suit to make it much more armored and had a lot of extra weapons. And, excuse me, for about half a year or so, this was the Batman until we get to Volume 3, when Bruce Wayne came back and reclaimed his mantle from Azrael. So that's the story in a nutshell. We'll get more into detail in this review. The story behind the story, there's a couple things going on. First of all, this was piggybacking off of the phenomenal success of the Death of Superman storyline. So after killing off Superman, the next thing to do was to kill off Batman. Although instead of killing Batman off, they simply had Batman become a cripple. So he was still alive. He looked like he had been crippled permanently, but spoiler alert, he does come back. But it was, at the time it was marketed that he was being crippled permanently, and there was a new permanent Batman. In retrospect, it all seems very naive to believe that any of these replacements would be permanent, but I bought it at the time. I was just getting into comic book collecting at the time. I was about 14, 15. I had gotten into it in part because of the huge publicity around the death of Superman, which I also was gullible enough to believe was real at the time. I've talked about the death of Superman before in other videos, which I'll try and remember to link everything down below. And I remember reading the letters column of some of these issues, which I bought off the newsstand at the time. And some people, a lot of people, at least the letters that got printed, were really upset that, this was a permanent change. There were letters from people saying, I've been reading Batman for 30 years and I have all this memorabilia in my house. And I can't believe you're destroying this legend or this icon who I've spent years collecting. People were, I'm sure some people saw through it, but it was marketed as a permanent change, and a lot of people believed that this was a permanent way they were going to shake up the DC universe. And In their defense and in my defense, I'll repeat what I said in my Death of Superman review. At this time in DC comic books history, it was not yet so cliched to do this kind of stunts. Maybe Marvel was different, but and again, prove me wrong if you can. Give me counterexamples if I'm overlooking something. But I think before the 90s, killing off superheroes and then immediately resurrecting them afterwards was not yet commonplace in the DC universe. Certainly, once they got the bug, they really got the bug. And then they went and they did this with almost all of their major superheroes, as they all had some big shakeup. So by the end of the 90s, I think everybody was very cynical about it. But this was still early days for this trend. So it was maybe believable that they could do this kind of thing. Or at the very least, some of us fell for it. So for people who were emotionally attached to Batman, this seemed like sacrilege to introduce a new character who was going to become a new and more brutal version of the Batman. But in fact, that was the plan all along, actually. And Wikipedia confirms this, and I think Movie Bob has talked about this on his channel. What this actually was, in retrospect, was just a longer version of a classic comic book trope called the replacement storyline, where fans are clamoring for a change in the character. So the writing team replaces the superhero with a version of the superhero that is more like what fans want for a few issues, just to show fans that actually what they thought they wanted really wasn't what they wanted. And then the original hero comes back to reclaim his mantle. Movie Bob said this was actually an established trope at this time, although I can't think of any examples prior to this, but let me know in the comments what I'm overlooking. So at the time in the 90s, there were a lot of people who wanted Batman to be more brutal, more ruthless. This was partly started by the Tim Burton movies, which portrayed Batman as a little bit darker. And I think this was partly just the trend in the early 90s in general, where comic books were getting more gritty. There was the Frank Miller, the Dark Knight Batman. There was Wolverine over at the X-Men was becoming really popular. So there was a lot of people who thought they wanted to see a Batman who was a bit darker and more brutal. So that's what this Batman was supposed to be. But then at the end, we find out that we the fans, do not like this darker and more brutal Batman, and we are overjoyed when the real Batman comes back to reclaim his mantle. Okay, so that's the overall trilogy. Focusing just now on Volume 2, Knightquest. Volume 2, Knightquest is the issues where this new Batman is out fighting crime in Gotham City. You can see it's a bit of a hefty volume. This was 655 pages. So you get your money's worth out of this. It's a lot of reading material. I reviewed previously on this channel Knightfall Volume 1, which ended with Batman getting his back broken. And I was expecting Batman Knightfall Volume 2 to pick up exactly where that had left off, with Bruce Wayne having his back broken, Bane still terrorizing Gotham, and no replacement Batman yet in sight. However, Volume 2 actually starts off with the new Batman already established, Bane already defeated, and Bruce Wayne already out of the picture on his quest. So what happened? Well, go to Wikipedia here. Sorry. This is my review of Batman Knightfall Volume 1. But according to Wikipedia, there are different editions. So there's the collected edition, but I guess the 2012 edition puts everything into just 3 volumes. The one I had been reading before, I don't know, it's a little bit confusing here. So I guess, yeah, the one I had been reading before had split Batman Knightfall Volume 1 and 2, and then Knightquest was Volume 1 and 2, and then Knight's End was... I don't know. These are the various different collected editions, but there are different edition runs here. So this is... It's confusing because the titles are the same. When you're ordering these off of Amazon, it's a little bit confusing. I didn't even know there were different editions. I was helping my school library order these books, and part of our ongoing effort to get our teenage students to read more books in English. At the school I'm working at here in Vietnam, we've been ordering comic books. And I guess since I'm the one who suggested these for ordering, this was my mix-up. But anyways, here we are. So if you've watched my last review of Batman Knightfall Volume 1, there are about 10 issues missing. We're going into Batman Knightfall Volume 2 here, where the new Batman is already established. And we spend about 500 pages watching the new Batman fight crime. Now, as I've already alluded to in these issues, I was getting into comic book collecting, or comic book reading, I guess is same thing. At the time these issues were coming out, I don't think I owned any of the actual issues in this collection. No, that's not true. I own the last one here, Robin number 7. And I collected some of the issues around here. I'll come back to talk about that. But this is an era of DC Comics that I'm very familiar with and have huge nostalgia for. And that nostalgia, no doubt, colors my critical perceptions of this. I'm much more forgiving of this, and I was very much looking forward to revisiting some of these storylines which I remember from my youth. Yeah. That, talking about actually what I remember, maybe now's as good a time as any to mention that there are some issues that are missing from this collection. Now, I don't necessarily mean that as a criticism, because the thing about comics, especially in this era, is the crossovers were so big that you couldn't possibly collect every single crossover in one edition. And this is both the frustration of reading comics. You know, the frustration is that you could never get all the issues that contained the story, and unless you had a lot of money. And certainly when I was 14 and 15, I didn't have a lot of money, so I spent my money sparingly, and I read what I could. But there was also part of the fascination. It was just this huge epic story. Maybe you couldn't read it all because you didn't have enough money to buy all the issues, but it was fascinating to me to get glimpses of what I assumed was a much larger epic story out there. There's at least one other comic book, so I'm going to switch over here to my computer again, that I had in my collection from those days, Batman versus the Outsiders, in which the new Batman fights the Outsiders. Now, the irony being, for those of you who knew comics, that the Outsiders is Batman's team. It was originally titled Batman and the Outsiders, but you see they've changed it to Versus here. And now Batman is fighting against the Outsiders. This was a crossover. It was not one of the Batman original comics. It was from the Outsiders comic. I had this one back in the day. I haven't reread it for about 30 years, but I remember it being a really epic fight between Batman and the Outsiders. And it's a shame it's not included, but I understand they can't include everything. There is, however, I'm going to complain about this, one area where the editors completely dropped the ball. And let's see if I can find the page I'm looking for. So, the new Batman, Jean Paul, does not want Robin around. He's a solo Batman. He doesn't like Robin. So Robin goes in the Batcave. The new Batman, Jean Paul, attacks him. He's get into this maybe a little bit more later, but he's driven a little bit crazy by this thing called the system, which is, I don't completely understand, but it's some sort of subconscious brainwashing that sometimes takes over him. And it ends with him strangling Robin. So is he going to kill Robin? What's going to happen? And then we go to the next page, and that is completely dropped. And we're off to some new adventure. So what happened? Well, again, this is something that I know courtesy of my days buying this off the newsstand some 30 years ago. This leads into Robin Volume 1. Sorry, Issue 1. So Robin got his own title after this. So it continues Robin, if you track down Robin issue number 1, the first page picks up right where this left off, where Robin is being strangled. And if memory serves, he collects, with his free hand, he manages to get one of a sharp kind of bat type knife out of his belt, uses that to stab the arm of the new Batman, and then frees himself. Batman apologizes and said the system took over, and he didn't mean to do that. And then Robin strikes out on his own, and that's the start of the Robin solo comics. Now, I understand that they didn't want to include the whole run of Robin comic books because those largely issues, after that confrontation finishes, the remaining issues, the rest of issue 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, largely go off with Robin having separate adventures that are taking place at the same time, but not directly tied into the storyline. But you can't just leave us here and expect this to make sense as a coherent storyline. You either would have to include Robin number 1, issue number 1 in this collection, and you could do it. I mean, it's a hefty collection, but there's room for a couple more comic books in this binding. Or I've seen some of the Marvel collections do this. Just include maybe like the first few pages of Robin 1, and then maybe like a footnote at the end saying the issue continues. And the rest of Robin issue number 1. So some of the Marvel collections will include kind of parts of an issue to wrap up the storyline and before going back to the regular issue. That would have been an option as well. To just leave this hanging here is, I'm going to go ahead and say this, an editorial failure on DC's part. You can't just leave it here and then forget about it, which is essentially what they did. That criticism aside, I think that's the one place they really dropped the ball. The other places are not as evident. There are, of course, all sorts of storylines that are alluded to that are not contained within these pages, but that's just the nature of comic books. They're always kind of crossing over with each other. In a way that I think, like I said before, can be quite frustrating, but can also be quite interesting. I've compared it on this channel before to the difference between a linear story, which is what most storytelling forms are, and kind of a tapestry story where you have different strands of the story going forward in time, but then different plot threads bouncing back and forth between those linear strands. And I know they're not doing it to create art. They're doing it to sell you more issues and make you feel like you have to buy everything to keep up with the story. But I still feel like it's an interesting advancement in narrative technique nonetheless. Okay. So that little digression overward, this functions mostly as a coherent story where the new Batman is fighting crime in Gotham. And it's pretty much what you would expect. There's a bad guy. Batman fights him. We go to the next issue. There's another bad guy. Batman fights him. And there are overarching plot threads which are woven throughout this. But issue by issue, it's very much traditional comic books. A bad guy of the week type story. Sometimes it'll get wrapped up in one issue. Sometimes it will go for 2 or 3 issues, but it's just Batman fighting the bad guys. In a way that, I'm sorry to say this, began to bore me after a while. So when I first started this, I was loving it. Just remembering all the nostalgia of early 90s comic books from this time. Like, I remember that character. I used to have that issue. I remember this plot thread, blah, 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 blah. But as I kept reading this over these 655 pages, the Batman fighting bad guys just started to bore me. And I remembered, I hate to say this, I remembered why I got into comics, but then I remembered also why after a couple years I stopped reading comics, because at a certain point, what really is on offer here? I mean, we've got a story, and the story, it's interesting, like I said before, about how comic books juggle multiple plot lines. So there is that. But then the individual stories themselves are just Batman fighting a new villain. Now, young boys always like comics for the action, and it does always end with a few panels of action. But how exciting is this action, really? I mean, especially when it compares with Batman the Animated Cartoon, which was on TV at the same time these comic books were coming out. I mean, the Batman the Animated Cartoon would have a long choreographed fight which would go on for like 3 or 4 minutes, or I don't remember how long they were exactly. Here we just get a few panels, and then the fight's over. I mean, I'm not saying more of the issue should be devoted to fighting. That might make it even more boring, because then we'd have even less story. But it is a genre that has its limitations, huh? They do some interesting stuff with it, but at the end, it's just Batman fighting the bad guy at the end of every issue. And from an adult perspective, maybe you do get bored with that. What is clever is the way that different plot threads are teased. So what they will quite often do is, for example, the Joker will be the bad guy for a couple issues. But before the Joker storyline comes to the fore, they will tease that the Joker is coming for a few issues prior. Now, it's a rather simple narrative technique, I guess, when you lay it out. But certainly, I remember when I was collecting comics back in those days, it gave me the illusion that they were juggling multiple plot threads at the same time, and that the narrative was actually a lot more complex. And I hats off for them for being able to maintain that illusion. When you're actually reading them all through, you notice that actually it's not quite as complex as I thought it was back in the day. They're not so much juggling multiple plot threads as they are just kind of taking one upcoming plot and thinking far enough ahead to be able to tease it for a few issues prior. But it was still part of the fun when you were buying these off the newsstand or buying these off of the rack back in those days. The art on here varies, and that's because Batman had about 4 titles that were coming out during this time. So there are some artists in here that I quite like, and some of them that I don't. And this one here, which I believe is from Shadow of the Bat, is art that I don't really like. It's I don't know. What do you think? They do have kind of the more traditional superhero art in this collection as well. I mentioned this as well when I was reviewing the Superman comics from the 90s. And I had initially thought that this was maybe just a lack of talent in some of the artists. Like, maybe some artists just can't draw the classic cartoon style Batman. But I'm beginning to think that, given that this art was so prevalent during the 90s, maybe this was just the in style at the time, at least for some of these artists. But then Tom Grummett, who is drawing on the Robin comic, is the opposite of this. He does, in my opinion, the characters just as I always pictured them in their cartoon forms, in their classic kind of bold pop lines here. So I don't know. You get a variety of art styles. The stories are episodic, but the overall theme during Knightquest is that the new Batman is more brutal than the old Batman, and people are getting increasingly concerned about that, especially the police that Batman works with, to the point, let me see, where is it? Commissioner Gordon gets disillusioned enough that he shatters the bat signal at the end. So this is in retrospect. Well, yeah. How do I want to phrase this? My memory of this storyline, and I only had a few of these issues back in the day. But my memory is this was a new and brutal Batman that at first it seemed to us that the DC editorial team was pushing on an unwilling audience. Like, come on, guys, you'll like this new Batman. He's hip and cool, and he's got an edge to him, and he's 90s, and it's everything that we've always wanted. And the fans were resistant to it. But then gradually it became apparent that we were never really supposed to like him, and that this was all a setup for Bruce Wayne coming back to reclaim his mantle, as happens in Robin number 7, where Bruce Wayne comes back to reclaim his mantle. Reading this all now, though, it strikes me that the new Batman actually wasn't really that bad. He had a more armored suit. He had claws on his fingers, which he would occasionally use to punch the bad guys. Sometimes it seemed like they were sharp claws, although so a little bit, it seems to me to vary a little bit from frame to frame, whether these are knives at the end of his gloves or just kind of claws. The what the art is implying seems to vary, in my opinion. I don't know. Maybe I'm not paying close enough attention. But he, for the most part, seems to hold Batman's values of protect the innocent and don't kill anyone. Now, this is broken near the end when he lets one of the villains fall to his death. But they do it in such a way, spoilers here. First of all, he doesn't kill the villain. He just lets him fall to his death. Arguably, he still hasn't killed anyone. And second of all, he's obviously so conflicted about it himself that, I don't know, it strikes me on rereading this that there's a certain, to a certain extent, it seems like they didn't fully commit to their own storyline. Like, this is a new dark, brutal Batman, except really he's not that bad. And the way we get told that we're not supposed to like this Batman is from the way the other characters are reacting to him. So the other characters are really kind of hitting us over the head, showing us that we are not supposed to like this Batman, that he is bad and has gone over the edge. And that seems to come through more in the other characters' reaction than the actions of Batman himself. I mean, Batman really up until the end is still, he's fighting Clayface, and he saves Clayface's baby, and it seems to be a lot more reasonable in these pages than I remember him. Even while he is clearly suffering from delusions and hallucinations, and something called the system, which is his parents brainwashed him as a kid, which I don't fully understand. But then, to be fair, I think you would have to read earlier issues that might be in one of the Knightfall Prelude collections, where the character Jean Paul is more fully introduced. While all this is happening, Bruce Wayne is off on his own adventures and recovering from his injury. And I never really read any of those issues, so I don't really know how he does it. But turns out he gets healed from having his back broken to the point where at the end he comes back and he does say he's a little off his game and he's going to need to retrain. Yeah. So what does he say? The physical memory is gone. I'm physically fit enough, but my reflexes are shot. The physical memory is gone. So the Batman's in a weakened state, but he's physically fit enough. He's somehow fixed his broken back. So that was happening parallel to these stories in a series of other issues, which are not included in this edition. According to Wikipedia, they're included in the Omnibus edition, which is yet another edition which was released in 2019 or something like that. And that was called Batman Knightfall The Search or something. The parallel issues where Bruce Wayne is being healed, going on his journey of healing, are not included in this edition, but then Bruce Wayne does come back at the end and sets the stages for the confrontation between Bruce Wayne and the new Batman, which will be in Night's End, and I will read this and review this next. What else to say about this? I think I've said most of what I want to say about this, actually. Sorry. The storyline with the Joker is interesting. There's a the Joker is an interesting Batman villain. He seems to exist in his own surreal world. So the Joker wants to make a movie about Batman. And he's surrounded himself with Hollywood people who he's gotten to agree to the whole thing. And he also has these movie critics he keeps around with him who are just like Siskel and Ebert, who critique the movie as he's making it. And the whole thing is kind of, yeah. Here they go. So it looks exactly like the real Siskel and Ebert. Until the Joker finally gets frustrated with their criticisms and shoots them down, as you would expect the Joker to do. So the Joker storylines seem to exist in this surrealistic world, which is a little bit totally different than the rest of these Batman stories. But I guess that's what you go along with in these stories. And there is an interesting point here. A few people realize that the Batman is not actually the real Batman. He's a replacement Batman. And there's a scene here where is it? Yeah, the Batman is fighting off the goons, and the Joker's watching it. And he says, something different. The way he moves, the ferocity, the lack of grace, the sheer brutality. It's not him. It's not bloody him. So the Joker, after all these years of fighting Batman, has just got Batman's style and moves down so well that when he sees somebody else just trying to brute force through as a Batman, he just realizes from the way that the guy moves that he's not the real Batman, which enrages the Joker and makes him want to, yeah. Instead of giving him a long, elaborate death scene, the Joker's just going to kill him off quickly. I would have liked to have given you a more grateful demise. But since I now know that you're just an... What's that? Ersatz bats. Well, I don't have the heart anymore. Make my dailies, you phony. I thought that was a nice little touch with the Joker-Batman relationship. Other than that, yeah, I think that's all I have to say about this issue. So, next up, Batman Knight's End, where Bruce Wayne fights the replacement Batman to reclaim his label. And I'll review this one next, whenever I finish it.